Hello, I'd like to talk to you today about an interesting First Tier Tribunal case. It's a case called, as you can see from your screens, Coomber and HMRC. It was heard right at the end of last year, 2016, and in tax litigation terms, it's rather interesting because, as you'll be aware, it often takes years, sometimes years and years, between the events which gave rise to the dispute with HMRC and the court issuing its verdict. In the Coomber case, the facts that we're talking about actually happened this time last year. It was all going on in February and March 2016, and it strikes me as quite remarkable that a few months later it has already been litigated in court, because I don't think I've ever come across another case that has been decided quite as quickly as that. And I have to say, I do have a lot of sympathy with the taxpayer here, Mr. Coomber, because what happened, what it was all about, was this. This time last year, he settled his self-assessment liability around the 31st of January. His tax bill, presumably for a balance of his tax and his first instalment of his payment on account, was just under £19,000. And what he did was he sent the revenue a cheque for the requisite amount on the 2nd of February 2016. A couple of days later they received it, and following their normal practice they credited that to his account. His cheque was drawn on his main bank, which was Santander, and for reasons that have never satisfactorily been explained, the cheque was dishonoured by Santander, despite the fact that Mr. Coomber had more than adequate funds in his account. What then happened was that the revenue didn't, in the meantime, inform Mr. Coomber, nor apparently did the bank, so he was all the while unaware of this situation. On the 1st of March 2016, Mr. Coomber's accountants rang up the revenue and they said, "Please can you confirm that our client, who paid his nearly £19,000 tax bill a month or so ago, that has gone through satisfactorily?" And the response that they got was yes. So they're quite happy with that. And a day or so later, the revenue's records were updated, and around the same time he also received his bank statement from Santander for the month of February. And of course he saw to his horror for the first time that his cheque had been dishonoured. So he obviously didn't want to let that hang. He had got plenty of money in his account, so he wrote out another cheque, sent it in, and by I think the 17th of March 2016, effectively that cheque was properly credited to his account. So that second cheque didn't get dishonoured. Unfortunately, as you'll be aware, not only had Mr. Coomber paid his tax a little late, so there'd be a very modest interest charge that would be added to the near £19,000 that he owed, but also if you pay your income tax more than 30 days late without good reason, there is what nowadays is known as a late payment penalty, which you pay on top of the interest. The late payment penalty initially is 5% of the tax, although if it's kept outstanding longer and longer it does go up. 5% of just under £19,000 in Mr. Coomber's case came to £942, and a day or two before his replacement cheque went through, he got a bill for an extra £942 to settle, presumably along with any interest that would be due. Now, Mr. Coomber, not unreasonably, felt that he had good reason for not having paid his tax on time, and although he would have to accept that he clearly owed the tax, and he would also clearly owe any small amount of interest that was due, he said, "I jolly well don't owe another £1,000 nearly for this late payment penalty, because how could I have known that my tax was being paid late?" And that, in essence, was what he decided to do. He decided, in his case, to take an appeal to the First Tier Tribunal and say, look, you can't reasonably expect me on a daily basis to monitor every cheque I pay to make sure that it's gone through or not, particularly where this cheque appears to have been dishonoured incorrectly. Surely that represents a reasonable excuse, and you can set aside my late payment penalty of £942. Very unfortunately for Mr. Coomber, the First Tier Tribunal decided to the contrary. They said that Mr. Coomber had contributed to the problem for three reasons. First of all, he'd paid by cheque, which he had then posted. If that cheque goes astray or gets lost, then there is, of course, a greater danger of delay. If instead he had paid his tax bill by backs or faster payment, A, he would have guaranteed that it was being paid, and particularly if you do the faster payment route, it would have gone through on the same day. Backs, I think, normally take something like 2 or 3 days before it credited, but either way, you know it has been paid. Secondly, the tribunal commented that he had deliberately chosen to settle, like many of us of course do, his tax bill at a pretty late stage. Now, there's no reason why you can't settle your tax bill right at the last minute, as he had done. Indeed, he was just a little late. His cheque went in on the 2nd of February, I believe, in this particular case. But again, the tribunal was a bit unsympathetic. It said, if you had settled your cheque, let's say, the bill sometime in December or early January, this is less likely to have been a problem. And thirdly, they pointed out that as far as one is concerned, the bank had a free phone number. The cheque represented, one imagines, for Mr. Coomber, what was for him a pretty large payment. There was no reason why he should not contact the bank at their free phone number and check to see that the bank had cleared. So they said, for these three reasons, we are not prepared to accept your reasonable excuse. I'm afraid not only have you got to pay the interest, you've also got to pay the late payment penalty. As I've said in the notes, the tribunal judge stated, it is the taxpayer's responsibility to ensure that any sums due to HMRC are paid on time. In my view, it is not HMRC's responsibility to have told the taxpayer that his cheque had been dishonoured, and I'm not pointed to any statement of principle or decided case that HMRC is subject to any such duty. So they dismissed Mr. Coomber's appeal, and the late penalty stood. I think that is a very harsh decision. For example, they say you could always check up on the phone, particularly with any large amounts. You can imagine that there are an awful lot of taxpayers paying large sums in the month of January, as 31st of January looms, in settlement for their outstanding income tax liabilities, where they're under the self-assessment system. You can't imagine too many banks or building societies would be terribly impressed to be fielding huge numbers of calls from people saying, just checking to make sure that my cheque has gone through. So I'm a little surprised by it. The only point that I could say in this particular instance is it does seem to me, although there's been no mention in the reported case about this, that Santander, the bank, were clearly wrong. Why would they dishonour a cheque when there were ample funds in the account? That just doesn't seem to have been considered. And obviously, if I was Mr. Coomber, given that I'm going to be stuck with this £942 penalty, first thing I would do is to say, that's been caused wholly by virtue of your incompetence to the bank. You reimburse me for it, because effectively it is your cause, not mine. And it may well be that the reason the First Tier Tribunal took that tack is they nevertheless wanted to give a measure of protection to the public revenue, but they accepted from Mr. Coomber's perspective that as far as one was concerned, he would be able to be recompensed, almost certainly by the bank. It would be interesting to get a follow-up in due course on this particular point. I don't suppose we ever will, but you'd like to think that that would be the case. But I would be very intrigued to know exactly what Santander's reasoning was behind bouncing a cheque where you have got adequate funds in your account. Certainly, I think most of us would be absolutely hopping mad if that happened to us, particularly if it cost us nearly £1,000 of extra expenditure. And you would certainly be wanting some sort of recompense, possibly even more than the amount of the extra expenditure that you had to incur in compensation. But this case is a timely reminder that any client who settles his tax bill by cheque, especially if it's a substantial cheque, perhaps on that one occasion ought just to follow up fairly quickly to confirm whether on phone or online that the payment has indeed cleared satisfactorily. Thank you for listening to this talk. My name is Robert Jamieson.